What's up, Better Daily? This is Coach Alex VanHouten. We are diving into our Recovery Pro Tips workshop this evening. We're going to be talking about the science and practice of resilience, and I'm looking forward to handling your questions about how to recover well from a nutrition standpoint, from a lifestyle standpoint, and also from an exercise standpoint, how we can make sure that our exercise is also fostering recovery. So I imagine tonight's workshop is going to run the gambit, and I'm looking forward to your questions on recovery. So this evening on my agenda, nice and simple, we're going to talk about what is recovery, and then we're going to talk about the major components of recovery, what make it up, and then maximizing recovery, and then a brief Q&A depending on what questions we have throughout the workshop. Note that this coming Thursday, we're having our group coaching session, same time, 7 p.m. Central. And what we're going to be doing in our group coaching session is working to make the concepts of this workshop practical. And also, since we had to delay our sleep workshop, we'll be diving into sleep specifically in that coaching session. So if we don't get deep into sleep here, I want to make sure that we handle your questions with regard to sleep there. So burning questions from the group, those of you who reached out, thank you. And obviously, if you're live with us, you can ask whatever questions you like about recovery. And so the burning questions that I got were, one, what should I eat after a workout? Which is a great question. Then are BCAAs, branched chain amino acids, good to take? And then the other question I got was, is ibuprofen okay? And I hope that by covering the science of resilience and whatnot, that we'll be able to answer these questions intelligently. Now, I actually started things a little different here in our workshop. So I'm going to talk about what is recovery, and then I'm actually going to go to the quick tips of recovery rather than diving into the science first. So I'm going to talk about the quick tips, some of the things that you're probably most interested in first. That way we can get the question juices flowing. And also, if you're a note-taking person, the bulk of the notes can be up front. And then if you want to nerd out with me thereafter, then we can get into the science of why those things are the way they are. So first, what is recovery? Recovery is really the process on the other side of stress. So when it comes to adaptations with regard to exercise, there's the exercise part, which is, moving and lifting weights and cycling and yoga and all those things. And then there's the period thereafter. And what's actually really powerful about recovery is that that's where the magic happens. So we'll talk more about that in a second. But if you don't take anything else away from me this evening, the core message here is recovery is where the magic happens with regard to physical betterment and exercise. So the recovery process is the process by which our tissues heal from damage. You can think of that as a process of wholeness. Your body wants to manifest the genetic material you have well, and therefore when there's damage, it's trying to heal itself. Two, our cells adapt to stress. That's the process by which our cells adapt to stress. That's called resilience. So every single cell in your body is also wrestling with stressors. And so that means that they are dealing with the stressors and trying to come back stronger over time. So then there's also a process of recovery, psychologically speaking, where your mind restores willpower. That happens primarily while you sleep, but it could also happen on vacation. You can think of that as readiness. So we have wholeness, we have resilience, we have readiness. And then last but not least, your nervous system, not just your brain, but your spinal column and the nerves that flow throughout your body. Your nervous system is solidifying memory as well as a part of the recovery process. And so that's learning. So take for example, let's say we're learning how to squat well. Everybody squats, right? Everybody has to poop, right? Okay, that's that's another way to say that. I've heard people say, they tell me not to squat because I have bad knees. I'm like, everybody has to poop. So eventually you're squatting in your day. So let's say we're learning how to squat. In the process of learning how to squat, we go through a workout that has squat movements as a part of it. After the workout, the tissues in our quadriceps and our glutes and in our lower back and in our core, they're all restoring themselves after having been broken down by a stress. Similarly, the cells that make up those tissues, perhaps in your quadriceps, and we'll talk about this in a second, they are also signaling to the body, hey, we need more powerhouses in here. We need more mitochondria. And so that's resilience. You have wholeness, you have resilience. Then your mind is like, man, that was a rough workout. Tomorrow, or maybe 2 days from now, or if it was my leg workout, maybe three 3 days from now, then your mind's like, hey, I'm ready to try that again. And then your nervous system is recovering, is learning. And so next time you try squats, you're actually better at it this time than you were before, because you have solidified those nervous system connections. You know to sit back into your invisible chair, and you know to grip the ground through your feet, and you know to keep your core engaged, and you know to keep your chest up. And so moving through the squat, every single time you do that, you get better and better. And the recovery process, I hope you're hearing, is not just an exercise thing. This also applies to work. This applies to relationships. This applies to cardiovascular work. So there's a lot of different ways that you can see recovery show up. So I promised you the quick tips in the beginning, so here they are. There's quite a few of them and worth explaining, but if recovery is important to you from an exercise perspective, write these ones down. And these are also in the PDF notes that I sent you via email prior to this workshop. So first quick tip is post-workout carbohydrates. If you are exercising intensely, then having some carbohydrates within an hour of your workout is very helpful for the recovery process. We've talked about carbohydrates a bunch of different times before, so unless people want to talk about specific sources of those, looks like Scott's eating some now. Wink, wink. I'm just kidding. Then that'll help to move you forward. This is important because insulin is a part of the inflammation response, as we'll talk about in a bit. And so what this does is this increases your body's ability to both fuel and sustain the recovery process post-workout. Now, some of you have reasons not to carb load after a workout, and that's fine, but that's tip number one. And these aren't in order of importance, by the way. So don't worry if tip number one doesn't work for you, tip number two will. Number two, if I had to rate one of these as most important, this is the most important aspect of recovering well. You need 50 to 75% of your body weight in grams of protein daily to recover from a good exercise program. So if you weigh 200 pounds, that's at least 100 grams of protein a day, if not a little bit more. And you can get more ninja with that recommendation, as we have in previous workshops. But protein is your building block. So if you're tearing down tissues, if you're asking cells to adapt, and you don't have enough protein in your diet, then you will not be able to rebuild stronger. There are no building blocks. In fact, getting too little protein in your day and then asking your body to adapt is kind of like asking somebody to build another section of your house, but not giving them any lumber. So they show up with, a hammer, and they show up with their nails, and they're like, hey, I'm here to build that new add-on. And you're like, so I don't have any wood. Good luck with that. And that's what happens when folks don't eat enough protein, but they go through an exercise program. It's asking your body to rebuild itself without proper building blocks. Then multivitamin and magnesium for periods of high stress. This is an important recovery tip. Those vitamins and minerals that are in a multivitamin and that we get from our foods are actually the enzymes that allow the reactions to occur that recover us. And so B12, for instance, is a really important one that releases energy from our food. If we're B12 deficient, then what will happen to us is during the recovery process, our body will not have the ability to supply enough energy to the building process. The fourth one here is get sleep figured out. If you're wrestling with sleep issues, and there are a number of them, which is why it's so important we talk about that on Thursday, get that figured out. It is second only to the protein issue. There are some people who can get enough protein and can't get the sleep thing figured out. You're still going to recover better with good protein in your system. But that sleep portion is monumentally important. As we talked about a few workshops ago, the REM cycle sleep is restorative of the brain and nervous system, and then that deep sleep is restorative of the tissues in our body. And so one interesting study found that when you learn a new exercise skill, let's use squats as an example, or maybe you haven't done a lot of walking or running and now you're getting into walking or running. If you don't sleep well that night, then any progress that you made learning that movement is diminished significantly compared to somebody who did sleep well that night. And that's something that they're finding in the research. Hydration and electrolytes. So some folks aren't getting enough water and electrolytes in their system to promote the recovery process. Electrolytes, just like those vitamins and minerals, are allowing the body's processes to go unimpeded. So in my example of building an extra door, or excuse me, an extra room on the house, you can think of your electrolytes and your vitamins and minerals as the nails. You know, it's one thing to show up without any lumber, it's another thing to show up without any nails. And so that's going to be really important to hold everything together and keep things moving forward. Then deload at least once every 12 weeks. So if you're exercising regularly, taking a little break from the intensity of your exercise regimen about every 12 weeks is a really good practice to go through. Meaning, if you work out 5 days a week, then maybe every 12 weeks you go 4 days a week, or every 12 weeks you go no days a week with some walking and stretching and yoga, right? The deload period allows the hormonal reserves of the body to rebuild themselves so that you can continue training intensely. That's an important aspect of recovery. Some people need to do it more often, and there are a few people I've met that can actually do it less often without detriment. So 12 weeks is a nice healthy medium. The other tip here is digestive inflammation is a great indication of global inflammation, meaning if things aren't working right in your digestive tract, if you've got really loose stool all the time, or you're really constipated, or you have a lot of stomach aches, or that sort of thing, that's a good indication that the recovery process throughout your entire body is compromised. So it's not a one for one thing. It's not like if you have diarrhea, your ankle swelling won't heal, but it is the case that the inflammatory markers of your gut are very reflective of the inflammatory markers of your joints, of the inflammatory markers of your endocrine system. And so if you have digestive discomfort, digestive issues that you're wrestling with, getting that hammered down, eating well for that, moving well for that, figuring out what the special magic concoction needs to be to make your stomach happy, then that will actually go huge lengths in recovering your hormonal, your tissue, and cellular systems. We're almost done with the quick tips here, and then I'll open it up for questions before I get into the why these things work thing. Get omega-3s. Omega-3s are fatty acids, and a lot of the fatty acids that we get in our diet on a regular basis are not omega-3 based. The reason this is important is because omega-3 fatty acids make it easier for the body to respond to repairs. And so those of you who I've spoken with quite a bit in the past, you pick on me because of my love of seafood, particularly sardines, but hey man, that's a great source of omega-3s for me. There are other sources of omega-3s in the world. There are hemp hearts, there's salmon, there's mackerel, there are literally algae supplements for those of you who can't stomach fish, and that's great. But getting those omega-3s in your system and having a diet high in omega-3s is an extremely important part of recovering well. Last but not least, phytonutrients are your friend. And when I say phytonutrients, most people are like, what are you talking about? They're the really fancy molecules in food that we know are there, but we have no idea what they're doing for us, except that when we isolate them and we test what they do on cells, we're always blown away. And by we, I mean the scientific community. So just note that some food really isn't food. I was talking to a guy today about cheese on his hamburger. And I was like, he's like, you're not really big on cheese, right? And I was like, show me the cheese you're putting on your hamburger. So he shows me, and it's like Kraft Singles. I said, read the ingredients. It was like processed cheesed product, and it had a list of ingredients. And I was like, that's not really cheese. You know that, right? Like, so note that some foods aren't food. So if we're trying to increase the amount of nutrient density in our foods, getting rid of the foods in our life that aren't really food and replacing them with real food is a big deal. So some food is great, and then some food is super. And what I mean by that is there are some foods that we're going to talk about today that have just amazing healing properties. The phytonutrients and the way they work on us, we're not really sure why they work. We just know they do. and more research is being done on what you could call superfoods. Like, I don't really like that word, but it's not a bad way to describe how some food is just nutrient packed and can be a really powerful part of the recovery process if we'll make good swaps with the food that isn't really food. So those are really the quick tips. And if you're just hey, give me the Cliff Notes version of this particular workshop, Alex, and I'll be on my happy non-nerdy way, then you're good. See you later. We'll get into the nerdy stuff in a second, but let me open up the floor to any questions out there that might have cropped up because of these quick tips. There we go. Here we go. I haven't had to pop my neck once, so that's good. What's out there about recovery that I might have spurned your interest after going through this list?
I have a question.
Yeah, bring it.
Okay, 7 years ago, I lost my gallbladder, and menopause has occurred. So I'm deep into that. With Ehlers-Danlos, on top of those compounding issues with digestion and hormones, how deeply does that impact recovery? And you know me well enough to know that I've done things like with a magnesium and different other things over the years to just support my body as it needs it. But how deeply does that impact recovery? And how can I best support the deficits in my diet because of the menopause, the Ehlers-Danlos, and the lack of the gallbladder?
That's such a good question. So a couple things there. First, the way digestive inflammation impacts global inflammation, we're really just starting to figure that out, and it's kind of mind-blowing. So I'll give you an example. So there's some folks who have a genetic predisposition toward particular bacteria in their gut that release a compound called interleukin-6. So, if you're that person sitting here, interleukin-6 in your digestive tract is the compound that signals to the rest of the body that we're under attack. We need to repair things. We need a global inflammatory response, which is what you'd get if you had the flu, for instance, or if you had an infection that caused a fever. Interleukin-6 is the precursor that does that sort of thing. And there's a bunch of other ones, but just as a acute example, in studies where they have introduced, for instance, a powerful probiotic called Saccharomyces boulardii for these individuals, and curcumin. So curcumin is a phytosome that comes from turmeric, and Saccharomyces boulardii is actually a yeast that seems to fight some of the bad bacteria and promote some of the good bacteria in the gut. And by bad and good, I mean those that are promoting inflammation. What they found is actually a reduction in C-reactive protein in the bloodstream. So long story short, if you can shift the gut to be less inflamed, there is evidence to suggest that actually reduces inflammatory markers throughout the rest of the entire body. And for those of you who have inflamed joints and stuff, that's a problem. It hurts when your elbows are inflamed, and when your back's inflamed, and when your knees are inflamed. And so to answer your initial question, the depth of the impact of gut inflammation on the rest of the body is almost impossible to understate. Like, it seems to be directly linked together. So if the gut isn't happy, it's very difficult to find the rest of the body in a happy place. And I've seen this in clients who I've worked with to help them eliminate particular things from their diet and add some things in and get a handle on what's got their stomach all upset. And I've seen them lose, and I'm not claiming weird things here. You guys know me well enough to know I don't claim weird things on that front. I've seen weight loss in the like tens within 2 or 3 days. So 10 to 13 pounds. And it's not like I burned a bunch of fat and I'm eating no calories. It's just like your body just let go of all of that fluid, all that inflammation. It didn't need it because the gut wasn't pissed off anymore. So there's a lot worth saying about that. But I would say that is paramount for you. is figuring out what foods you can eat that are high nutrient density, that don't piss off your gut, and then how you can support that inflammatory response. Because, with Ehlers-Danlos, it's very likely that you have a genetic predisposition to be more inflamed than most people. That's just par for the course. So anyway, I said a lot of things there. Does that give you some direction? And do you have a follow-up question?
No, that's good. It kind of goes along with the things I've been thinking about, and I've been exploring my diet that way.
Mm,
I do know I don't do well with carbs. Anything that sits heavy is dairy. Dairy does not do well with me.
right.
And then fats. I have a real hard time processing fats.
Mm,
Um, and even avocado, which
yeah.
usually sits kind of light on my stomach, tends to be a little on the rich side
Yeah.
over time. So
There are fats. So in the class of fats, think there are long chain fatty acids, and then there are shorter chain fatty acids. And the shorter chain fatty acids are easier for those who have less of that bile from the gallbladder. The shorter chain fatty acids are easier to digest, and there are some reasons that, like nowadays, we actually have digestive enzymes in pill form, and you
can
can
you
take.
give me an example of shorter chain fatty acid foods? Because I know avocado probably isn't one of those.
Avocados among the real long chain, as is pork and beef fats are also very, very long chain. So they, um, for lack of a better way to put it, they kind of slide through that digestive tract pretty quick if you're not breaking them down. But your shorter chain fatty acids are like your seeds. So like chia would be a good example of a short chain fatty acid source, and I want to say it's laurel, L laurel, L laurel. Dang it, the name escapes me. But the shorter chain fatty acids in your seeds are a really good example of where you're going to get good, easy to break down fatty acids. Similarly, in your fish, your seafood, your salmon, and your sardines, those omega-3 fatty acids in there, they're the long chain omega-3 fatty acids, but they're shorter than the fatty acids you're going to find in things like your pork and your beef and your avocado. So olives are also a good example of a shorter chain fatty acid.
Yeah, I do good with olives.
I think following this conversation, I'll post on the Better Daily group the list of fats and their relative lengths, and that might give you a good example of kind of a list of fats that should probably be in your diet, and how you can swap those out.
Okay, that'd be great. Thanks.
You got it. Good question. Anybody else missing a gallbladder? That's a really good topic for you to get things under wraps. Thank you for that. Any other questions out there? Pat's waving. What's up, man?
Just a quick question on get sleep figured out. The on deep sleep, if you're not getting a lot of sleep hour wise, but if you're maxing out your deep sleep, can that be a bridge? Can that be a lifeline? Is that something that kind of can help you through?
100%. Something that's weird about sleep, and I'm maybe 20 years from now we'll think about this differently, but something weird about sleep is if you take the deep sleep and you take the REM sleep and you add it together. Let's say you sleep 7 hours and you add REM sleep and deep sleep together, you get about 3 hours of working sleep, and the rest of it's like light sleep. It's kind of in between the working sleep, so to speak. And I'm sure because the body doesn't do a lot of things that don't serve a purpose, but I'm sure that light sleep serves some sort of purpose. But given what we understand about sleep, it's almost like half of the sleep that you get doesn't matter. So you get 7 hours, and in those 7 hours you get 2 hours of deep sleep and you get 1 hour of REM sleep, for instance. And so you got 3 working hours of sleep that's restorative to the neurology, that's restorative to the tissues of the body. And then the other 4 hours of sleep, like, I mean, might as well not have happened. And like I said, maybe 20 years from now we'll think about this differently, but as far as we know, light sleep is no different from meditating. Like, light sleep's no different from entering a different state of consciousness in conscious life. So that said, it's relaxing, but it's not probably not serving much of a restorative purpose on that front. So to answer your question, if you're getting deep sleep, despite the fact that you're not sleeping as long as you'd like, or maybe you're having sleep interruptions, then your body is doing you a solid. It's saying, hey, the sleep I do get, you're like a zombie. Like you are the dead, and we're gonna restore you in the very short time we have. And that's actually true of folks that I've worked with in their later years, in their 60s and 70s. They'll sleep shorter durations, but when they track it, they actually get good deep sleep, and they're none the worse for it. Like they're actually functioning. You know, if I got 4 hours of sleep or 5 hours of sleep, I'd be like, what are my kids' names? You know, like I don't know what's going on. But my body is, I don't know, it's being prolific with the sleep thing. It's like, hey man, get down to business. I wish there was a button. It's like deep sleep button. That would be nice. But anyway, that said, even if you're sleeping short and lower quality than you'd like, if you're getting that deep sleep, it's going to make a significant difference in your recovery. And for the guy clients that I've worked with, it usually coincides with weight training. They'll notice that their deep sleep is more readily done from a sleep perspective when they're able to weight train consistently.
Thank you.
Yeah, you got it. Good one. Any other questions out there on recovery? Have we lost Robin yet? Do I need to do a little dance?
Nope, I'm still here.
Good. For those of you who missed it, Robin said if I'm not interesting enough tonight, he's gonna fall asleep on me. It's a good thing we don't have any fun around here. All right. So, see, I didn't start with this because I would have lost you. You'd have been like, all right, I'm out. This is difficult. So this is really the components of recovery. For those of you who have been to previous workshops, you know that I like to compare entropy and enthalpy, that's calories in versus calories out, to a slightly more complicated and more truthful way of looking at how things in the body work. But if you don't take anything else away from this slide, I've got a quote here at the top. The power of exercise is not in the calories burned, but in the adaptations spurned by positive stress that are actualized in recovery. In layman's terms, the magic happens after your workout. The calories burned from your workout doesn't amount to a hill of beans in the long term of what you are becoming over time. And so here we're going to be looking at how this system in your body, this I've made it as simple as I know how to make it here, how this system in your body relates to the aspects of recovery that we'll be talking about in Nerd Speak this evening. So you see the stick figure with the calories in versus calories out. That's the way that the average person who explores fitness and recovery and stuff, that's the way they're looking at things. And so I'm going to invite you a little deeper to look at it with new eyes. So what happens at the level of the body actually revolves around your DNA there. If you see the DNA, the double helix right there, what's happening in the body actually revolves around what's happening in our DNA at the level of our individual cells. So exercise is a stressor, and that stressor is fed through our belief system. What in our body and mind tag that as a good thing or a bad thing. I've used the example of a mountain lion before. I'm running on a treadmill and it's a great workout and I've got good music and I know I'm working toward a goal and I'm really happy about my me time right now. That is going to affect me differently than if I'm running from a mountain lion. The movement's the same, the intensity could even be the same, but what happens at the level of my cell is different because of what I believe about what I'm doing. It's very important. And so there's the stressor, the intensity and duration you see on the left there. The stressor, the intensity and duration of it can affect how we recover. And we'll talk about that in a bit. And then there's the belief, the mindset. Is this good or bad? And what does this particular stressor mean to my future? That's the growth mindset. We'll talk about that as well. And that affects how we recover. Then we have inflammation. And inflammation gets a bad rap, like you should lower inflammation because it's bad. It's not necessarily bad. Inflammation is simply the process by which our body heals itself. So if inflammation is out of control, that can bring with it a whole host of other things. But a properly functioning body has a inflammatory system that's working well. And so we're going to talk about modulation of our inflammatory response and also the magnitude of our inflammatory response. And then we have our epigenetics, which is the turning on and turning off of particular genes in our genome. So do you guys see there where that around that double helix around your DNA, it says your potential. That's your genetic inborn potential. That's if everything good was turned on in you, what would that look like? How well would you think? How energetic would you be? How strong would you be? What kind of pain would you not be in if all of those things were turned on in you? And then there's also limitation. Your genetic potential is also barred by limitation. I am 5'9". I'm really 5'8" and a half, but I'd like to be 5'9", and nothing that I do is going to add to that. Like I can stand on my toes, right? But and that's my genetic limitation that's tied up in my genome. And there's a bunch of things like that, you know, like I'm not going to have blonde hair. Not that I would care to have blonde hair. I kind of like my hair. But anyway, the point is there's limitation tied up in there. And so epigenetics in recovery is the turning on of the genes that you want to see manifested and the turning off of genes that you don't want to see manifested, that you would like to limit. And that process is called methylation. That's the turning on of genes. And acylation, that's the turning off of genes. Again, this is kind of watered down. There's a lot of science behind that, but that's as elementary as we can get on epigenetics. And then last but not least, the last aspect of components of recovery is the repair and breakdown of the actual cells. And so on the other side of the genes there, you see reconstruction, resilience, proliferation. This is where your body takes the stressor that it's responding to. It takes the belief that you have about it. It takes your inflammatory process and the genes that you have, and then says, okay, this is where we're at. This is the blueprint. This is what we have to respond to. Now, what materials do we have in order to respond to this issue, in order to respond to this stressor? And so tonight we'll talk about the building blocks and the energy aspect of recovery as well. So this is, I mean, something we could spend 8 hours talking about. So, so if you guys have questions, I feel you. So let's talk. Does this bring up any questions for anybody? Because we want to get into each piece of recovery and make sure that you walk away with something valuable this evening. But any questions about this process or this umbrella that's a little bit different than how the fitness industry looks at exercise and recovery? If this sort of thing doesn't keep you up at night, then you might not have heard me well. I'm just kidding. It keeps me up at night because I'm a nerd. But this is super important to me. If you don't get anything else from tonight, I know I already said that, but this is, if you don't get anything else from me, number 2 is your exercise and recovery are more than calories in and calories out. Your exercise is a stressor that tells your body what to unlock in you, and your recovery is the process by which your body rebuilds itself because of the stressor that you're facing. And at its heart, this is why we can become 1% better every day physically. This is why we can become 1% better every day, is because this process is happening in you right now. And so I hope we can make the best of it, or something we talk about tonight can help you make the best of it. So I'm going to use one nerdy example, and then I'm going to try to be a little less nerdy the rest of the time here. So my nerdy example here is mitochondrial density. Everybody can say mitochondria, right? Mitochondria. Makes you sound really smart if you use that in a sentence tomorrow. My mitochondria are happy. That's why I feel so energetic. Mitochondria are the organelles in every cell in your body that release energy from fuel. So we think of them as the powerhouse of the cell. If you drove your car today, mitochondria is kind of like the cylinder in your combustion engine. When you press down the gas pedal, gas goes through the cylinder a spark fires, which starts a reaction. Boom! It explodes, and the piston goes up, and the piston goes down, and that's why your car can run right. Having more cylinders means you have more power. So a V4 engine, like the little 1988 Honda I drove, it's not a very powerful engine, but it got great gas mileage. Um, Mitochondria having more of those cylinders, a V8 engine, a Corvette, or even a V10. Gabriel and I looked out some of the fastest cars in the world, and they have like V18s. They've got a lot of cylinders. They guzzle gas. It's like 2 gallons per mile or something like that. Anyway, having more mitochondria is like adding cylinders to your engine, and you can do that. You have a certain amount of mitochondria in your cells right now that your body has decided is sufficient for what you're dealing with. And so mitochondrial density is actually one of these things that you can affect. And if you increase your mitochondrial density, if you tell your body, look, we need more powerhouses, we need more cylinders. I'm sick of being a V4 Honda. I'd love to be a V18 or V12, or maybe you're only a V8, who knows? There's a V8 joke in there somewhere that I just don't have the capacity to deal with vegetables and cars. It was too much. Anyway, so that's where you get, see on the left here, this picture, 1,800 calories for somebody who has excess fat on their body, and then 2,200 calories for somebody who doesn't have excess fat on their body. What the heck is going on there? Theoretically, the more you weigh, the more calories you need. But that's not the case if every single cell in your body is a V10 versus a V4, right? And this is actually a process that you can affect. So mitochondria increase the size of your metabolic engine. More mitochondria means the ability to release more energy from food. Cardiovascular exercise and endurance-based weight training increase the demand of your body on mitochondria. It tells the body, remember that stressor. It's like, hey, we need more mitochondria around here. And your cells are like, hey, we can make that happen if you give us enough protein and phytonutrients. And they're like, okay, sweet. And so every cell in your body starts increasing the amount of mitochondria. And then boom, you've got a bigger engine. If your body's adequately supplied with energy and building blocks, then the body can actually increase the supply of mitochondria. And last but not least, your secondary systems, your lungs, your heart, your blood volume, all of those things are enhanced to support the function of mitochondria through oxygen deliverability, which is a really fancy way of saying if you increase the size of your engine, you also need to increase the size of your muffler, because otherwise things explode. For those of you who like cars, if you don't have a big enough muffler, things explode if you have too many cylinders and not enough exhaust, right? And that's what your heart and your lungs and your blood volume are doing. They're allowing oxygen in and they're pushing out waste so that the engine can keep running smoothly. You can have a wonderful Sunday drive. So maybe I carried the analogy of car too far there. It's very possible, but can I get just a nod or a head shake if you get what I'm talking about? Okay, good. So epigenetically speaking, we can increase the amount of mitochondria that we had. And Pat, you and your lovely wife have a great head nod, by the way. Thank you for that. That was good. And I also like that Robin pulled his screen away from us so he could see his whole body in the head nod. So thank you for that too. Awesome. So this is very important when we're talking about recovery, and the reason I'm like hammering on this and being all nerdy about it is because when I say recovery and I say, hey, let's make sure we get enough sleep, and hey, let's make sure we deal with stress, and hey, let's make sure we get enough protein, it's an integral part of it's not leaving your body hanging. Like if you exercise today and you don't allow the recovery process to happen, or you don't support it, then what happens to you is you break down over time rather than getting stronger. And I hate that. There's nothing I hate more as a trainer than to see somebody work super hard and get broken down over time rather than built up. It it makes me want to cry. Like there's a shortage of people who work super hard in the world to better themselves. And so if you're working hard to better yourself, I want you to see that betterment. And if you understand this process, you can go, man, I do need to make sure I get enough sleep. I do need to make sure that I get enough protein in my life. I do need to make sure that I have more omega-3s in my life. I do need to make sure that I'm not like, oh, my stomach's messed up. Like, let's really figure out how to make my colon happy so I'm not, you know, in pain all the time down there. Those are, it's a whole moving machine that can do good things for you if we make the most use of this process. So, all right, I'm off my soapbox. Let's get to the tips. So I told you 5 things we're going to tackle. We'll start with belief, mindset. First, we have to say, is this stressor I'm going through good or bad? So a couple pieces of that. First, an encouraging support system is the most powerful tool in your tool belt for belief. So I have a lot of churchgoers right here on this workshop in particular. And I believe you would agree with me that no matter what's going on in life, it's important to be connected to that encouraging faith community, because sometimes your faith is not enough. In fact, many times your faith is not enough. You're encouraged by a support system that says, hey, I know you're going through a rough time, but God's still good. Amen. And you say amen, dang it, because that's true. And even when you don't feel like it, right? And you know, that's part of what this Better Daily group is about. You know, we're not as cool as church necessarily, but the idea that sometimes you're not feeling the workout, sometimes you're eating like garbage and you need to stop it, and sometimes you're not connected to a good spiritual practice, and sometimes your mindset sucks, and all of those things. But an encouraging support system can say, hey, there are other people going through crap too, and they're working to get better. So, you know, get on the horse, bro. Like we got stuff to do. We've got crosses to carry and things to move, you know, and the encouraging support system is it can't be understated enough, or overstated enough. How about that? Thank you, support system, for looking at me strangely when I said that wrong. It can't be overstated, because what stressors you're going through have to have a positive mindset in one way or another. And I'm not saying we don't go through really difficult times, but when we know that it matters and it's good, or maybe we can make it better, we don't have to make it worse, then that's a powerful step in a good and positive recovery direction. And kind of on that note is authenticity versus vulnerability. To be a part of a good support system requires that you're authentic. And I just want to hammer down on that word for a second, because a lot of the psychological community likes to use the word vulnerability. And I don't know if it's because I'm a dude or what, but I hate that concept of like, okay, sure, go ahead. I'm going to put myself out there and let you guys hit me in the chin in case you wanna. Like, that's not how I roll. But authenticity is different. That's saying, look, this is what I'm struggling with. This is where I'm at. You could call it vulnerability if you want, but there are people I know who can be authentic without necessarily, you know, opening themselves up to the world. And that's biblical, by the way. That's a don't cast your pearls before swine, lest they turn on you and trample you. that's Matthew. But anyway, that said, in an encouraging support system, if you want to have a positive mindset and affect your belief system well, you have to show up authentic. And then also, that's one of those things that you get out what you put in. The camaraderie of a support system is hugely paramount to a positive belief. Would anybody say that they get more fulfillment out of helping somebody than being helped? Would anybody say that? So that's a huge part of a positive belief system, is being part of an encouraging support system that allows you to drill down and help out, to be a part of moving things forward. And you know, it's hard to be down on yourself when you're worried about somebody else. You know, that's like having small children. I'm sleep deprived and basically dying, but I guess I'll feed you a bottle. Like, and you know, that's true. When people depend on you, you just kind of rise to the occasion, right? That's camaraderie. And then last but not least, just a subtle shift in mindset when you can say, even though this is happening, versus I can't do this because, even though this is happening, I'm going to X, versus I can't do this because. When you can make that self-talk shift in your belief system. Stressors don't stress you so deeply. Uh, it's even in your language saying, I'll find a way. There is a way. God has a way. Like there is a way, as opposed to like, I've hit a brick wall, I'm not going anywhere. Right. And then lastly is the growth mindset. I have an entire workshop on this, so I don't want to harp on it too much, but this is the idea of 1% better. If you want to get better at recovery, you have to celebrate betterment when it comes about. So I'm working with a client right now who sprained her ankle in the process of recovering her back, and it was like a freak thing. She was like walking up the stairs after holding a basket of laundry, and kind of tripped. At least she didn't trip down the stairs. Tripping up the stairs is a little less rough. Anyway, so she hurt her ankle, right? And prior to hurting her ankle, she had gotten to where she was deadlifting like a boss. She was getting about 8,000 steps a day. She was, seeing some weight loss and stuff. She was so excited. And then she hurt her ankle. And then today we were literally in the front yard on a speed ladder, just learning how to walk again, learning how to get the feet to move right and stuff. And she was so discouraged. She's like, man, I feel like I'm starting at square one. I'm like, no, you're not. Like, whoa, back up. You're recovering from an injury. That's different. You're still getting 1% better every day. Like if this injury had happened to you a year ago, would you even be out here? Would you even be moving? Would you even be worried about your protein, right? And that's not the case for her. So a growth mindset's very important, that you're always looking at what have I done, and how is that manifesting well? How am I getting better, as opposed to comparing yourself to, I don't know, some version of you think you should be. That's not very fair to you. So identifying progress and focusing on that progress is important. So I know I came out swinging with belief. So let's talk if there are any questions on this front. This is a hugely important part of recovery that's bearing itself out in the cognitive psychology right now. Questions, comments, or concerns about getting the mindset of recovery right? Did I miss something on that front? I know I've got some good mindset, strong belief people out there. So
Alex, I'd actually like to hear from Mark. I think he might have an interesting perspective.
Mark, you've been called out, brother. Do you have anything to add to this discussion about positive and good belief?
Take that.
I have to admit, I'm still thinking through what you said earlier about the belief with, like, if you're running from a bear versus whether you're running for exercise. And
yeah,
so I know that's totally a different part of what we're talking about. But this might be a different part of what you just said too, but I think it's crucial if someone were to ask me, for advice or something, and I often afterwards, after they've left, I've often thought, why is it I don't take that same advice for myself, kind of a thing? That
yeah.
the support that I'm presuming they felt, I'm hoping they felt, right? It seems like they felt, and it's going to be helpful. And I sometimes have that experience too, of course, people supporting me, but it's perhaps a bad habit that the beliefs that you have maybe about other people, you don't hold for yourself, I guess, in some way, or you don't allow that sort of if you be your own best friend, kind of a thing, I guess, is another way to say it.
Do you find it easier to show people grace than to give it to yourself? You don't have to answer that if it's personal. I mean,
no, I don't. I think that's kind of like what Alex was just saying about taking care of the baby at night. Is that you're always willing to help and to extend yourself, but maybe not as much to yourself. But anyway, I don't know if I'm touching on what you were looking for or not.
No, but thank you. No, that actually, that's perfect. It's interesting. It's interesting to get to know you.
Okay. Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. That's such a good add too. One of the things you kind of said in there was the advice that you give to people is something that you can find yourself going, you know what, that was great advice. Like maybe I should do that. That would be good. And if you ever find yourself in a position where somebody needs that from you, it's often an opportunity to reflect on how one could treat oneself better. Is the commandment, love your neighbor as yourself. But if you suck at loving yourself, then you're going to be really bad at the whole neighbor thing. Right. There was a really interesting study about people and their dogs, which was like, if I have a life-saving medication that I need to take daily for a organ transplant, I think it was kidney transplant, versus my dog has a kidney transplant and they have a life-saving medication they need to take daily. In this particular study, they found that people failed to give their pet medications 1% of the time, whereas they failed to give themselves the life-saving medication 40% of the time. So it's almost like I have higher regard for my dog than I do myself, even though that might not be something I would say out loud. My actions kind of show differently, right? I'm glad you brought that up. I think there's something to be said about treating people in that positive, powerful, loving ethos, and then going, oh wow, like it'd kind of be good if I did that for me. That would be good.
Well, the pilot says, he tells you to put your mask on first, right? Because you're no good to anyone else if you're no good at all. So.
Well said. And I think this comes back to the question of the self-betterment process, right? Because let's say in my head I'm thinking I need to lift these weights because I need to lose 10 pounds. I mean, okay, fine. But you wouldn't look at your wife, or at least I hope you wouldn't. Don't do this, men. You wouldn't look at your wife and go, you should lift weights because you need to lose 10 pounds. Because that's a crummy goal. It just is. It's like there's a lot of other reasons to lift weights, right? And so if instead I come to the bar and I say, today I am disciplined and committed in my weight training practice because I am working hard to be a good father. I'm working hard to set a good example for my clients. I believe that 20 years from now, I'd like my body to be good for something. So I'm going to do this today. For me, that's a much deeper meaning than I need to lose 10 pounds. And in the same way, I tell my wife the same thing. Like, I got to deal with your butt in 20 years. You're going to lift weights, man, because I don't want you like whining and in pain. And they're like, we got stuff to do. And you're awesome. And I want great things for you, right? That's a good reason to tell your wife to go lift weights. But anyway, and the same thing for your kids, right? Like how would you feed your children? And then would you feed yourself as well? Like how does that work out? So thank you, Mark. I think that's an aspect I might have missed here in this slide is I don't know what to say about that. In the encouraging support system side of things is giving is often a great way to give to yourself at the same time. I don't know if that's a good way to put it, but I appreciate you bringing that up. And thanks for asking the question, Pat. Nice. Anybody else out there want to add to this? There's a comment in the chat that says, I'm just tickled to hear that talking to myself is actually a good thing. So that's good. Yes, positive self-talk is a good thing. The negative stuff, not so much. So then kind of more physiological, the stressor component of this recovery. So remember, we've got the stressor that filters through the belief system, the stressor. So I'm speaking about exercise specifically here, although it's very true that we deal with a lot of other stressors. So the stressors, most importantly, we are looking at intensity and duration. So how intense is the stressor? That means like, what's the capacity for this stressor to break you down? And the thing about exercise is that positive exercise programming does not have to be too intense. This is my main quip with CrossFit, and I'm going to say it, and I would say it to every CrossFit person I know, because when you work out in a CrossFit style workout, if you are a well-conditioned athlete and you have a mindfulness around how hard you can work out and should work out, then you can do CrossFit 5 days a week, and it's not rough for you. But if you're somebody who doesn't know better, and maybe you're a little deconditioned, and you walk into a facility that's asking you to give it your best shot every single time for the next 5 days a week, it will eventually break you down. My recommendation here is, on a scale of 1 to 10, your exercise should be about a 3 to 7 on your rate of perceived exertion, about 80% of the time. So that means that as far as going full tilt, lifting the heaviest weight you can, running as hard as you can, doing more steps than you've ever done before, all those things, that should be about 20% of the time or less. Whereas the moderate intensity stuff and the low intensity stuff should be about 80% of the time or less. Now I know this is super general, but this should give you a sense of, if you approach your exercise practice during the week and you find yourself in the place where you're working super hard every day for multiple minutes at a time in your workout, then you're setting yourself up for mal-recovery. So like high intensity interval training, for instance, is not something you should do every day. Or I picked on CrossFit. I think you guys get the sense. And then the duration, a true stressor. And I'm not talking activity here. Some of us going for a walk is not exercise. Some of us going for a walk is exercise. If going for a walk is exercise to you, you know it. Right now you're working to get your step count up in the day. You know that walking is exercise for you. But your duration of actual exercise, not activity, exercise, shouldn't be too long in the week. For most people that I've worked with, 3 to 5 hours per week is sufficient. And not just sufficient, it will create progress for you if it's intelligently put together. Now, it doesn't mean like if you spent 2 hours at the gym and most of the time was spent talking to people and you're a social butterfly and stuff. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about actual work, like actual, I'm breathing hard and lifting weights and sweating, actual work in the gym. It doesn't have to be too long. And I would advise caution if you're exercising more than 8 hours per week. And this is very common among endurance athletes, people who are training for triathlons or cycling events or marathons or that sort of thing. That's when exercise starts to get too long in duration. So that being said, I'm sure there are some questions out there about exercise as a stressor, but this is an important aspect of recovery, is to ensure that intensity isn't too much too frequently and that duration is not too long during the week. And obviously there's a difference between activity and exercise there. So any questions out there about exercise as a stressor in relation to recovery? I catch up on my chat here while you're unmuting. Got a nice conversation about cats. Nice. None? No? You guys have heard me drone on about exercise. It sounds like you're like, I get it. I know hypertrophy and volume.
Is that is that combination, Alex? Is that both cardio and exercise, 8+ hours a week?
Very, very good question. So defining cardio is important here, because let's say I'm going for a walk and I'm a conditioned person. That's not cardio unless you stuck 30 pounds on me and asked me to walk up very large hills, right? So cardio is like your heart rate is entering those lower zones. For you, it'd be like 120 plus, Pat. Like when your heart rate's starting to get above that 120 mark, that's when we're starting to count that toward our 8 hours.
Shoot.
Shoot.
You're not exercising enough.
Darn it. Thought I was an ultra marathoner walking all this. Walking the dog so much.
Walking does nothing.
It does do things. It's not part of this recovery conversation. Lisa's
Okay.
gonna give you a hard time from now on. Yeah,
I'm gonna go to bed disappointed, I can tell you that.
you're out the door with the trooper, and she's like, "Remember, it's not exercise.
Right.
None
You
of this
forgot your pack.
counts."
You forgot your pack in the mountain. Thanks, Alan.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Well, it's not a goal. Please, it's not a goal to get 10 hours of exercise a week. Like that's very hard on a body. Let's try not to do that. I want you guys to keep recovering. Oh man. Okay. Inflammation. This is the repair process. So like I said, inflammation gets a bad rap. Because many people are overly inflamed and not taking care of that system. That's why it gets a bad rap. It can create problems in the long run. Cholesterol and heart disease and atherosclerosis and osteoarthritis and all kinds of itises that are related to having too much of our immune system turned on too often. Because our immune system is amazing. It can do amazing things, but if it's constantly on and constantly trying to repair you, it can create problems. In fact, immune dysfunction is usually related to cancergenesis. So that's not good. So how do we affect inflammation positively? So there's modulation and magnitude. Modulation is how often it turns on and off, and magnitude is how intensely it turns on when it does turn on. And when I say turn on, I'm really trying to simplify a very complex process here. So some PhD someday is going to watch these workshops and be like, oh, don't say that. And I'm going to be like, look, man, people don't want to hear your interleukin 3 crap. So anyway, inflammation, modulation. You can modulate inflammation with polyphenols, microbes, and periodization. So polyphenols are complex compounds in foods. I listed a few of my favorites here: ginger, garlic, curcumin, which comes from turmeric, and aloe. Those are my favorite polyphenols to jump up and down and be excited about. But these polyphenols specifically act on the immune response to keep it from turning on when it doesn't need to turn on. Be a good way to explain it. So the microbes. Pat's laughing at me. I don't know why. There's like a little laughing emoji. I didn't know you could do that. Thanks for teaching me that. The microbes in your gut can also have a role to play in whether or not your inflammatory response is on or off. As we talked about earlier with that great question about menopause and gallbladder, the microbes in our system can predispose us to be in a state of inflammation regularly, and that is rough on the body. Specifically, if you have joint issues, if your inflammatory markers are always high, then your joints are always going to be in a state of disrepair. They're always going to be under attack, so to speak. It's kind of like if you run for a long distance, your knees hurt afterward. Is that a bad thing? Well, no, not if they're repairing themselves and your cartilage is getting a little thicker and denser, and not if your bones are getting a little thicker and denser, and all of that's getting better, right? But if your body always feels like it just went for a long run, that's a bad thing, because the inflammatory response at the level of those tissues can also break them down over time. So the microbes in our gut specifically are very important from that perspective. So like fermented foods, those of you who like to pickle things, those old school pickles, those are like not the pickles you buy from the store. They have sodium benzoate in it, so there are no microbes in your little dill pickle jar. But like, I'm only talking about this because we just canned a bunch of cucumbers, and so I've been fascinated with fermented foods for the past few weeks. Anyway, for fermented foods like kefir, pickles, your sauerkraut, is that right? For some reason, sauerkraut, kimchi, those sorts of fermented foods can be great sources of probiotics for your gut to allow the proliferation of new microbes. And then I talked a little bit about a probiotic called Saccharomyces boulardii that seems to foster beneficial microbes, especially in folks who are predisposed to inflammatory bowels. So if you're wrestling with ulcerative colitis or Crohn's disease, Saccharomyces boulardii has actually been linked to a decrease in inflammation in the digestive tract. And last but not least, periodization is a part of this. So not just what we're eating, but how we're exercising, right? So if I do the same thing and I'm working out intensely in hypertrophy or strength for 12 weeks and I never take a break from that, then I'm going to be asking my system to be overly inflamed as well. And that's when you end up with issues like tendonitis or tendinosis and whatnot. And what really stinks about that is we don't know how to tell that you are overly inflamed until it's too late. We don't know that. We don't know how to tell, and by we I mean the scientific community. There's no way to tell until you're injured or your gut's mad at you. And so it's up to you to learn what your body can and can't handle well, and what things turn on the inflammatory response and what things seem to turn it off. And that's a little bit different for everybody for a number of reasons. And so that's an important thing to note. And that's why I talked about the gut earlier as a key point, is if your digestive tract's not happy, and by not happy, I mean you've got indigestion, you've got loose stool, you're constipated, you've got acid reflux, all of those things. If your gut's not happy, that's a very good indication that there are some changes that need to be made to improve your inflammatory response. And then the magnitude. We can actually influence how intensely our inflammatory response happens when it does happen. And this is important because, imagine, again, we hire a guy to, I don't know why we're hiring a guy. I would go fix the house myself. So let's say I'm going to go fix the house. Okay. I'm going to fix, I don't know, some plumbing. If it's not too complicated, like I've got a 3rd grade knowledge of plumbing, maybe 5th grade, but if you're gonna, have to break concrete and weld pipes together, I'm not your guy. Anyway, so I gotta fix some plumbing, right? Imagine if I look at the plumbing and there's just a little pipe fitting that needs to be fixed or whatever, and I need to put some plumber's tape on the joint, and I need to screw it down, and then it'll be fine. Haha, woohoo, we fixed it. Instead of that, I'd take a sledgehammer to it, just beat the crap out of the whole thing and start from scratch. That's what some people's inflammation does to their body when it responds to damage. Instead of like, oh, there's a little bit of inflammation to deal with the little problem here. It's like, oh, there's a little problem. Everything but the kitchen sink. And that is brutal. And I've worked with a lot of people who are wrestling with allergens, who aren't sleeping well, who aren't getting enough omega-3s in their diet, and for the love of God, have not reduced their sugar intake and caffeine and alcohol such that the magnitude of their inflammatory response is so intense that even the smallest things set them back very quickly and very easily. And that's something we can do to improve our recovery system. We can rest well. We can go to bed at the same time and wake up at the same time. We can improve our sleeping environment. Again, we can talk more about that on Thursday. We can remove things that aren't doing well in our gut. As was said earlier, if dairy doesn't do well with you, stop it. Stop eating cheese. Stop it. Like, you don't need it. There's other things that are worth eating that aren't going to ruin you on the inside, right? Omega-3 fatty acids, this is how you actually make your cells less intense from an inflammatory perspective. It actually changes the composition of your cell membranes not to be so touchy. And then insulin, decreasing the amount of simple carbohydrates and sugar that you eat in your day, or at least getting them when they're appropriate, like directly following a workout or preceding a workout, to help your insulin stay nice and steady as opposed to spiking regularly throughout the day. That's another way to keep your inflammatory magnitude down. So I said a lot of things there. What questions did I bring up for you guys about inflammation? We've got people dropping dairy.
I got a question.
Yeah, bring it.
Oh man, it just left me.
Dang it.
Yeah. I hate when that happens. I really do.
I've heard omega-3s are really helpful for short-term memory.
Yeah, but I'm not processing fats well, so I'm just working against myself. Okay. Can inflammation ever be a positive thing? I mean, obviously, our body's responding to a stressor
Hmm.
like it does in exercise. And I'm not talking about the kind of inflammation that comes from foods, because that's a little different.
Right.
But is there any situation where inflammation can be a positive thing, and can I learn to work with that? Having a body that doesn't process pain normally. My neurons are always firing. I'm always in pain. I'm always suffering that way, you know. But is there any way I could make that inflammation work to my advantage? I mean, on one hand, I got great muscle definition and response to exercise. I mean, my body does really do well
Mm.
with managing the water in my muscles and all that kind of stuff. So is there any point in time where inflammation can be a positive thing?
Very good question. And if I didn't articulate this well, I'm very sorry. Inflammation is positive, period. Where inflammation becomes a problem is when it's over much for the situation and over long. So, me fixing the pipes, for instance, that analogy is meant to say the repair process, which is what inflammation is. Inflammation is the repair process. The repair process is good. The repair process becomes bad when it is overly substantial for the size of the problem. So let's say, you do some squats or you go for a long walk, and we would expect a little bit of inflammation in your lower body, maybe in your back, maybe in your hips, right? We would expect some inflammation as part of the repair process the next day. What we wouldn't expect and what we don't want is for your digestive tract to be angry at us tomorrow and you to have a headache and extremely low energy the next day. That would mean that the inflammatory response that was supposed to repair you was too intense magnitude wise compared to what actually happened. And you can think of it like being raw, like the internal nervous system is raw, and a large global inflammation response is brutal to it. So inflammation's always a good thing as a process. It's a good repair process. We would die without it. We wouldn't last very long without the repair process of inflammation. So it's a good thing. It's probably part of the reason you're able to grow muscle so well is because you have a big inflammatory response. What's important is how long does it last, and is there any way to support it chilling out after it's done the good work that it needs to do, right? So I hope that answers that well, because it's not so much that we want to eliminate inflammation. We just want it to be well modulated to what we need it to do at the time, rather than to go overboard and make us miserable and more injured in the long run. Let's see, a good example of this is allergens, right? So like not just a sensitivity, but an allergen. In allergies, you are exposed to something that causes an immune response in your body that's disproportionate to what you were exposed to. So if any of us breathe a bunch of pollen, most of us will get kind of stuffy nosed because our mucous membranes are putting out fluid so that it doesn't all end up in our lungs and all that stuff. And so it keeps bacteria and all kinds of stuff out. So that's a good process. But there are some people who have allergies to things like ragweed, for instance. And if the ragweed protein gets up in the nose and enters the sinus cavity, it's not just a small mucus response to keep things out. It's everything but the kitchen sink, which is what your nose is doing, dripping like a kitchen sink in a response like that. That's not good. That's an overblown inflammatory response, right? And what I'm saying is that there are some folks whose body respond to exercise and some foods and I don't know, life sometimes like an overblown allergy response. And we don't want that for you. We want you to be able to use that recovery and repair process well and support it well so that it's not ever overblown or overlong, so it's causing more damage than good. That was probably a lot of words to say what I was trying to say there, but does that help? Does that make sense? It's good that you get inflamed. We just don't want you to stay inflamed. I'm going to take that as a thumbs up, or maybe I missed a chat. There we go. Yeah. So how do I best work with my overblown inflammatory response? Good question. In fact, these things here, if these things are dialed in, then that would be the extent to which I understand an overblown inflammatory response. Anything more overblown than this is something that starts to get into the medical world. So if you're consuming foods that are increasing your insulin and allergies, so like you said, you don't do well with simple carbohydrates and you're cutting out dairy and that sort of thing, it's a good place to be. If you're not getting good quality and quantity sleep, and you want to look into that a digestive enzyme supplement so that you can break down omega-3s well, so that can actually be incorporated into your body. You and I can connect after here. So I owe you a long chain fatty acid, and I owe you a long chain and short chain fatty acid diagram, and I owe you a look at what digestive enzymes look like. I'll put that in the Better Daily group after this, given your questions. And then adding the polyphenols into your life daily, and good probiotic foods daily, and periodizing your exercise daily. If those things don't limit the magnitude of your inflammatory response, then you have exited my realm of expertise. So, which brings me to the question about ibuprofen that somebody asked in the group earlier, which is to say, is ibuprofen okay to use? Generally, ibuprofen is something that doctors or physical therapists will recommend to deal with acute inflammation, so that you don't have pain related to the inflammation over time. So ibuprofen can be helpful for short-term things, but because of its the way it works, if you're taking it long-term, if you're taking 800 milligrams for 12 weeks or more every day, then what happens is over time it'll actually hurt your digestive tract. So ibuprofen is great for short-term reduction in inflammation that's associated with reducing pain, but over the long term, the NSAIDs like ibuprofen or naproxen, which is the primary ingredient in Aleve, those sorts of things can be rough on your digestive function after a long period of time. And so they're not bad, they're actually good for their use, but they're not meant to be long-term fixes for inflammation. So thank you for that question as well. Any follow-ups there? All right. The last piece then is epigenetics, and this is a fun one. Epigenetics is about the potential and limitation. So potential meaning, what frequency you could work out at without it being a problem, what your PRs look like. There are some folks who can deadlift like an ox, and there are some who maybe shouldn't do so much deadlifting. There are modalities. There are some folks who do just fine with running regularly, and there are some folks who need to accept that they're more of a cyclist than a runner. There's also a metabolic side to our epigenetic potential. Some of us do well with a higher carbohydrate diet, whereas some of us do better with a higher fat diet and lower carbohydrates. I will say that as the studies bear it out, as far as becoming 1% better daily, your genetic heritage is not as powerful as your belief system. So I like to joke that it's not a joke, it's actually real, but my wife and I did this 23andMe test to look at our genetic profiles, and she's actually one with all of the athletic genes, the ones that you find in Olympic athletes. And I don't have any of them. So take that, Alex. But I could totally jump way higher than she can. So take that, wife. But I believe I could fly. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is in the studies that they've looked at genetic potential, if somebody doesn't believe in what they're doing, if they don't believe they can succeed at it, or if they don't believe positively about it, then it limits the gift of their potential. It's not going to, like I said earlier, it's not going to amount to a hill of beans if you have the genetic potential and you lack the belief to do anything with it. So That said, from a recovery perspective, when you're thinking about figuring out how often you should work out regularly or how long you should work out or what's best for you, it's a process of understanding what works well with your individual makeup. And then there's limitation. So how how quickly you can recover, how sore you will be. There are people on this call that I know of who are just strange genetic freaks of nature who don't feel sore. And I don't get it. It's crazy because if I do leg day, I whine for like 48 hours every time I sit down, like, ah! And this person can do leg day with me and they just don't. They're like, I don't know what you're whining about. I feel a little tight. I'm like, that doesn't mean that the process isn't happening. It just means from a genetic perspective, they don't feel as sore. And so that's an important part of recovery is understanding what your genetic predisposition is. Because that person might not feel sore, but maybe they don't need to be jumping the day after doing heavy squats, even though they don't feel sore. It's a really good way to get injured. And then enjoyment. There's actually a genetic marker for how much you enjoy exercise. Some people don't like it as much, and I'm sorry, it's still good for you. You'll have to find something to enjoy about it. But that said, there is a genetic aspect to that as well. So if you're on the side of things, you're like, I don't really like this working out thing, and I wish you would shut up about it. That's not just you. It might be kind of built into you. Doesn't mean you don't need to find a way around it and a way to progress forward. I don't really like the baby stage of fatherhood, but I had to handle it. So so there's that. We all have our challenges. And again, the limitation's not as powerful as belief. And I will submit to you my box jumping video versus my wife and let you tell me who you think has the athletic genes. I'm just kidding. She's super cool. She's a beast. All right. So we went through the components of recovery. You guys hung with me well. Robin didn't fall asleep, but he just left. So who knows? That said, what questions, comments, or concerns are out there? We've covered stressors, we covered belief, we covered inflammation, we covered epigenetics, and that was quite the trip through recovery. I didn't even say the word BCAAs. So if anybody has any questions about that, maybe I should say that.
If I could ask real quick, Alex, on
Yeah.
sugar, if you or me, if I slam a bunch of sugar, which I'm prone to do at night, what is it that actually happens is it my cells or that makes me feel crappy in the next day? Or like, even if you just eat off like a bad, big, heavy, greasy meal or something, what is it that actually is occurring? Or is it just sludging up the system?
Good question. So sugar specifically has a very interesting cascade of effects. So as you consume, and you said slam sugar, that's actually a good way to think about it because, if I eat some blackberries, they've got sugar in them, but they're not going to hit my bloodstream very hard. And that's really what we're looking at is how intensely is your bloodstream affected by the sugar that you ate, right? Because when you eat a bunch of simple sugar with no fiber and no protein, then what happens is your blood sugar spikes really high. Okay, it's not just the sugar you consume, it's how much of it ends up in your bloodstream all at once. So your blood sugar spikes really high, right? Let's say I eat a handful of Skittles versus blackberries. Here's Skittles, here's blackberries. Like very little difference, right? Very big difference. So Skittles super high. Now when your blood sugar is very high, a couple things happen. There's a system in your body to control blood sugar. It's your insulin system. It's a very important system. If that system's messed up, you die. That's what diabetes is. That's why people have to, put a shot in their side or take special medications or have a pump installed on their body if their pancreas isn't working right. Because if blood sugar gets too high, you die. Why? Sugar, high concentrations of sugar in the bloodstream damages the walls of arteries. Okay, so it's actually its own internal cause of inflammation when your blood sugar is high. Okay, so the first note here is that high blood sugar causes inflammation from the inside. You can do the same thing to your skin if you scratch it enough. it just, keep going. It's going to get red and eventually bleed and stuff. That's what sugar does to you on the inside when your blood sugar is high. So your body has a hormone called insulin that it uses to lower your blood sugar. So blood sugar is high, it's causing damage, global inflammation, brain, neck, legs, arms, organs, all of the above, damage all around, high blood sugar. And insulin's like, hey man, let's get this thing under control. So your body puts insulin in the system. What that does is it opens up the cells of your body to pull the sugar out of the bloodstream so it can stop causing global damage. Okay, so you've already gotten inflamed. That's in the first 10 to 20 minutes after a high blood sugar spike. Now our body is opened up to reduce the amount of sugar to stop causing damage. Well, now insulin's high. And insulin is the most anabolic and inflammatory hormone in the body. So insulin signals several of the factors in your immune system to go deal with the damage from the blood sugar. So now your inflammatory response is really high. So high blood sugar damages the body on the inside, and then high insulin increases inflammation to those areas, right? So what's actually happening is, I eat a handful of Skittles, and if I've already got damaged nerves, damaged blood vessels, damaged cells in different areas, I'm just adding fuel to the fire, and then I'm pouring gas on it. It's like let's just blow it up. Like, let's go down in a blaze of glory. Now this is a little different if you're having sugar post-workout. The way this works is your glycogen stores are empty. If blood sugar starts to rise when your glycogen stores are empty following a hard workout, following some intensity, then what happens is the blood sugar doesn't get a chance to go super high and cause an insulin response. Your body starts dumping that excess sugar into glycogen. That's why post-workout sugar isn't as negatively impactful on the inflammatory response. Does that make sense?
So post-workout being how many hours afterwards?
Within an hour. You got a nice 1 hour slot in there.
Those 8 p.m. workouts.
Or you can just have your ice cream sandwich in the morning. I mean, like,
I did. I did. We had that conversation.
Maybe had a few at night too.
That was this morning. It was all 3 of them.
That's good.
Just saying.
Sorry. I'm in athletic phase.
I got a question in the chat that says, if your triglycerides are on the higher side, does that mean you have high insulin? Not always, but they're usually correlated. So one of the ways that the body deals with higher blood sugar on a regular basis is it dumps it into triglycerides. You can make excess carbohydrates triglycerides. So that's not always the case, that if you have high triglycerides, you also have high insulin, but they usually correlate pretty well. I want to say the correlation somewhere in 0.6-ish. So they track closely together, but not perfectly. It's a really good question. So yeah, if you get your yearly blood work back and it shows your triglycerides are elevated, then watching your sugar and simple carbohydrate intake could make a difference. As can low intensity cardiovascular exercise. It's a good way to use up some triglycerides in your bloodstream. Good question. Awesome questions, guys. Great. Any other ones out there? I know I've kept you for a while, but this is such a good topic, and I know it's broad, but we've got to talk about it, man. We got to recover well. Good. Well, guys, thank you very much. This was an excellent workshop. I appreciate you. I hope that it was valuable to you, that you had some good takeaways to munch on or not munch on. I don't, depending on whether you need to eat a little less sugar or not. But that said, I'm looking forward to Thursday, where we're going to be diving into this practically for you and specifically around sleep. So I look forward to seeing you guys then. Until next time, kick butt, take names, guys. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex.
Bye.